Yeah, we're a little formal because this is a court proceeding, even though we're not in court. Over the years, we've done this both ways. We've had these ceremonies in the courthouse, the federal courthouse, which is just to the south of us, a block or two, and then we've had the opportunity to be in this magnificent facility. So I welcome you, I congratulate you, and we're going to try to move this right along. Due to COVID, we've trimmed back these ceremonies. In the past, you would have been exposed to many, many long and boring recitations of congratulation. But today you only get one long, boring speaker, and that's me. So we're going to move this along and get you out of here as new citizens as quickly as we can. Are we ready to call the roll?
Yes, sir.
All right, when I call your name, please stand up and say what your country of birth. All right? So, Ayake al-Maqsood.
Will you speak more loudly?
Iraq.
Iraq, thank you.
Sangre Mang.
Thank you. This is a big room, obviously, and everybody, when you speak, it just goes up and disappears in the ceiling, so everybody has to speak with their biggest outside voice.
Natalia Isabel Ramirez.
Yes.
Where are you from, man? Where were you born?
That's a lot.
Thank you.
Zano Chai Ishimwe.
Thank you. There's going to be a huge prize, whoever speaks loudest.
Chin Pei Wang.
Thank you.
Jamari Julie Joseph.
Thank you.
La Dean Geda Bochum. Joshua Sena. Shalini Verma Singh.
India.
Pla Kin U. Esther Chair. Man Swan Kim.
You're the leader. You're in first place for the big prize. Big
Tushar.
prize of citizenship, by the way.
Tushar Prakesh Bhaktiani.
United Arab Emirates.
Ruchimande Camille.
Thank you.
Islam Mohammed Abdelaziz.
Egypt.
Alex Latang Sanga Sailum.
Myanmar.
Zora Opoluski.
China.
Thank you.
Zainab Yunus Ibrahim.
Sudan.
Peter Ram Lian Mum.
Myanmar.
Nazesh Mirza Hussein.
India.
Hashim Shalo Kakozi.
Democratic Republic of Congo.
John Geo Yuk Lee.
Korea.
Vanessa Nguyen.
Vietnam.
Miguel Angel Rivera.
Mexico.
Sritha Sikasa Bumba. Excuse me.
Say one more time.
Yes. Srithela.
Straight
Strela. Sikisa.
Democratic Republic of Congo.
Thank you. Chimi Kalume Asumani.
Democratic Republic of Congo.
Tatin Par. Kamjen Mon.
Myanmar.
Fatima Zorin Halam.
From Iran.
William Salai Laiton. Anna Jad Gibla.
India.
Jose Octavio Arce.
Mexico.
Erica Yiting Sword.
Taiwan.
Monju Chung Suwon.
Myanmar.
Rachel Tianzamawi Mung.
Myanmar.
Noah Minnesota Sim.
Republic Korea.
Tesfaye Badlab Johannes.
I'm from East Africa, Eritrea.
Hijun Huang Na.
Korea.
Musadik Sadiki.
Afghanistan.
Zina Lalfak Zwal.
Myanmar.
Nongart Nilsuk Wander.
Thailand.
Paul Raphael.
Egypt.
Cherry Ma.
Myanmar.
Yaman E. Alaban.
Syria.
Mehyar Imad Alaban.
Syria.
Ivan Tan.
Indonesia.
Mandeep Kaur.
India.
Maween King Sui.
Myanmar.
Temple Boy Silo.
Myanmar.
Thank you so much. All right, what we're going to do now is I'm going to administer the oath of citizenship. And I will, I'm sorry to say, it's an archaic, old oath. There are references to princes and potentates, and that sort of thing, which probably most of you weren't exposed to. But in our country, we believe in oaths. I took an oath when I became a federal judge, very similar to the oath that you're going to take today to show allegiance to the United States. So what we'll do is I'll start off and I'll say I, and then state your name. Don't say state your name, actually say your name. And then I'll break it up so that it's understandable and you'll repeat after me, okay? So, this is the business part of the meeting. So, everyone please stand, raise your right hand, and as clearly as you can, repeat after me. I state your name, hereby declare an oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen. That I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law. That I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law. That I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law. And that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. Congratulations. Please be seated. You know, when we started, you were asked to stand and state your country of origin. That was at my request. I love to know where all of you are from. I'm from half a mile from here. I've lived my entire life within about 5 miles of, well, at least I've practiced law and been a judge within a mile of where we're sitting right now, my entire career. But I particularly like to hear of those folks who are from the Republic of Korea. When I was 2 months old, my father shipped out, got on a train half a mile south of here at Union Station and went to Korea to fight. When I've done this now, I've been a judge for about 10 years. Before that, I was a lawyer for a long time. And I learned, until I was a judge, I'd never witnessed a naturalization ceremony. And when I did witness my first naturalization ceremony, it was conducted by one of our more senior judges. And she taught me the practice of making comments that would make the date memorable for you, so that you would remember this date as you remember the birthdays of your family and loved ones and your anniversaries and all the other important dates of your life. I guess I don't have to do much to make this date memorable, given the historic events that are going on in the Ukraine. And it's certainly ironic that we're here in the Indiana War Memorial. Before we came on, there's a tremendous museum down here. If you ever get the opportunity, you want to come back and look at it. A museum honoring particularly Hoosiers who have gone to war in various parts of the world. And as I said, my father fought in Korea. I have 2 brothers who fought in Vietnam. Luckily, I was never forced or in a position where I had to do that. But it's obviously ironic that that's where we are today. And if you go down to this museum, you're going to see that the signs say that the men and women who fought in those wars fought to restore peace, and that's oftentimes what's necessary. But obviously, I didn't know, as I prepared to talk to you today, that this would be such a momentous day. Obviously, we've all been worried and hopeful that this day wouldn't come, but it did. At least the day is, as far as it's created a terrible situation in Ukraine and may involve so much more of the world. So my focus in trying to make this day memorable to you was that it just so happens that this date, February 24th, is bracketed by 2 events that emphasize the office of the President of the United States. The first event, of course, is President's Day, which we had last Monday. President's Day moves around in the United States by virtue of a statute. Well, let me back up and say, originally it was intended to commemorate the birthday of George Washington, our first president, February 22, although I'm going to tell you in a minute, he wasn't born on February 22, but I'll tell you that in a second. But then later on, Congress passed a statute that caused all federal holidays, or attempted to cause all federal holidays, to fall on a Monday. So federal employees like me would have 3-day weekends. And so President's Day now occurs on the 3rd Monday of February. And of course, February was selected because it's not only the month of the birth of George Washington, but it's also the month of the birth of Abraham Lincoln, 2 of our most important presidents. The second event that, as I said, brackets this date, and will, as these events occur in the future, you'll always be able to remember I became a citizen between these two events. The second event is the State of the Union address that the President of the United States will deliver next Monday, March 1st. Let me go back. I told you that even though this was originally, President's Day was originally established to commemorate the birth of George Washington, and in fact, in many states, including Indiana, we don't call it officially President's Day, we call it Washington's birthday. But it just so happens that when George Washington was born, and I think it was 1732, I believe it was. At that time, he was a citizen of the British Empire. There was no United States in 1732, of course. There was no United States until the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And there was no president until we adopted the Constitution of the United States in 1788, 1789. But when George Washington was born, and he was a citizen of the British Empire was then on the Julian calendar established by Julius Caesar. And if you'd looked in the calendar that was at the Washington home on the day that George Washington was born, it would have said February 11th, 1731, because that's what the Julian calendar provided at that time. Later, when he was a young man, the British Empire moved to the Gregorian calendar to better account for the fact that it takes a little bit more than 365 days for the Earth to go around the sun. And we have to account for that little bit more by a leap year. And we used to not know exactly how long it took, and so we were losing days. And when they switched to the Gregorian calendar, named after Pope Gregory, George Washington's birthday moved from February 11th to February 22. So the interesting thing is that even though in Indiana and many other states that holiday is called Washington's birthday, it never falls on Washington's birthday, either one of Washington's birthdays. Another interesting thing about President Lincoln's birthday, which is February 12th, 1809, and we obviously, as part of President's Day, we celebrate that because he was one of the most important, impactful presidents of the United States. Few people know that on that very same day, February 12th, 1809, another important person was born, Charles Darwin, who's, along with a fellow by the name of Alfred, I think his name is Alfred Russel Wallace, I think I've got that right, developed the theory of evolution by natural selection, which of course is one of the basic principles that all of our life sciences are based on. So that was a pretty important day in the history of humankind. But as we went along, presidents of the United States became more powerful. When we started our country, the one thing we knew was we didn't want our president to be like George III of England, a tyrant, a person who had power that was unrestrained by the will of the people. And so initially, we invented a president that wasn't very strong, wasn't very powerful. But over the years, presidents of the United States became more powerful, particularly in times of crisis for our country, like the American Civil War and President Lincoln added to the power of the country, like World War I and Woodrow Wilson added to the power of the country, and the Great Depression and World War II and Franklin Delano Roosevelt expanded the power of the president greatly. And the President of the United States has so many powers. He is effectively the CEO of our country. He is the Commander-in-Chief, and that's obviously a role that our President, the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, is going to have to serve in the coming days. He also nominates all of the Article 3 judges, including all of the justices of the United States Supreme Court and all of the district court judges. Now, you probably don't know this, you probably don't care very much, but I'm one of the few kinds of federal judges who is not nominated by the President of the United States. I'm a bankruptcy judge, and as such, I'm appointed by other judges, not by the President. I'm not a political appointment, as some other judges are. But another important role of the President of the United States is that he's the leader of his party. And I want to tell you a little story that I just learned recently that just exemplifies how powerful and important that can be. In 1944, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in his third term as President of the United States, third four-year term, and was about ready to be nominated by his party, the Democratic Party, to serve a fourth term, which of course can't happen any longer because we've since amended the Constitution to limit presidents to 2 consecutive terms. But Roosevelt and his party had fallen out of love with the Vice President of the United States, Roosevelt's Vice President of the United States, a fellow by the name of Wallace, who was a little bit too liberal, particularly for the Southern, what we call Dixiecrats, the Southern element of the Democratic Party. So, President Roosevelt intended to leave Washington, D.C. and travel, as my father traveled in 1950, across the country by train. He was heading to Hawaii as opposed to Korea, where my father was heading. And on his way, and he was going to meet with Chester Nimitz, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet for the United States, and Douglas MacArthur, who was the general in charge of the southern part of the Pacific, including the Philippines, in terms of the effort by the United States to defeat Japan, the Empire of Japan. But on his way to Hawaii to meet with those military leaders and map out what they hoped was the end of the war in the Pacific, he stopped in Chicago, where the Democratic National Convention was then meeting. And as I said, the Democratic Party had fallen out of love with his then Vice President, and they didn't want him to be the Vice President for Roosevelt's fourth term. What made that so interesting was, as you all know, Franklin Roosevelt had been a victim of a degenerative disease since the time he was a young man, polio. And his doctors had come to the conclusion he wasn't going to live for more than a fraction of a fourth term were he elected in November of 1944. So, in effect, whoever was picked as his vice president was extremely likely to become the President of the United States. When Roosevelt stopped in Chicago, he met with the chair of the Democratic National Convention Committee, Democratic National Committee, yes, the chair of the party, who had come from the convention. Roosevelt couldn't, because of his impairment, because of his disease, they didn't want to go to the trouble of taking him from the train to the convention site in downtown Chicago, so the chair came to him. And the chair said, you need to tell us who you want to be your vice president. And Roosevelt handed him a piece of paper with 2 names on it. The first name was William O. Douglas, who was by many people thought to be the most liberal Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He'd also been the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, very powerful New Dealer. And Harry S. Truman, but they were listed Douglas Truman. The chairman of the party turned to Franklin Roosevelt and said, would you consider reversing the order of those names? And Roosevelt took the paper back, struck out the names, and rewrote them as Truman Douglas. And as a result, Harry Truman became the vice presidential candidate and president of the United States. The point is that as the leader of his party, this one man had the power to choose the president of the United States. And of course, as I said, over time, the office has grown, particularly in times of real distress for our country. And now, this Monday, you will, for the first time, as a citizen of the United States, get to either listen to or hear reports of what I assume will be a very momentous State of the Union address. Our president will, of course, address the situation in the Ukraine. He will also, I assume, in the next few days, if not prior to the State of the Union address, either at the State of the Union address or shortly thereafter, reveal the name of the person he's going to nominate as the next Justice of the Supreme Court. I guess the one other thing about the President of the United States that's maybe the most important to you is you can't be the President of the United States. That's probably the only difference, the only significant difference now between you and I, or you and any of the other natural-born citizens of the United States that are in this room, because in Article 2 of the Constitution, there are 3 requirements for the President of the United States. One is that the person be a natural-born citizen, not a naturalized citizen, that they be over 35 years old, and that they have resided in this country for at least 14 years. However, if you have children after today who are born in this country, they can be the President of the United States. So, I congratulate you and I welcome you. You are now, pursuant to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, citizens of both the United States and the state of Indiana, both. And so I welcome you as citizens of our country and as fellow Hoosiers. Congratulations.